Hello there everyone, I'm uxwbill, and before you watch the rest of this video, I'd like to take what will hopefully be just a brief moment of your time to offer up some important amplifications, corrections, and clarifications concerning the video you're about to watch. It's a matter of fact that the video you're about to see almost didn't end up happening because it started off on a terribly wrong foot. I was chasing my tail looking for a problem that didn't exist, all because of this stupid little 9-volt battery. I was of the impression that the product you're about to see a review of was in fact defective, when it turned out that this battery, which you'd think they would have done at least some minimal degree of quality control on, although maybe I'm far too much of an optimist, this was manufactured by a real company that has a presence on the web and everything. But one apparently managed to slip through the cracks. It's not even past its expiration date, as you can clearly see, but it led to me making some very unfavorable remarks about this product that turned out not to be at all based in fact. Well, I came across the remnants of this video and I decided to salvage whatever was left of it and see if I could turn it into something presentable. And that's what I'm going to try to do when I review this, a very unusual multimeter from Harbor Freight Tools. Those of you who are outside of the United States probably won't know that name because I don't think Harbor Freight Tools actually has any international operations. It really doesn't matter. Out of all the multimeter products that they sell, this is perhaps one of the most unusual in that you won't actually find it with all the other multimeters. This is actually over in the automotive tools department, and here's why. This is the one reason why you would ever buy a multimeter like this. It's fully manual ranging, as you can see. Internally, it's probably nothing more than a slightly grown-up version of the DT830 branded multimeter that Harbor Freight sells under their own name, sometimes gives away with a coupon. But aside from its size, there is one considerable difference, and that is the presence of automotive engine analyzer functionality. You get both of a dwell angle monitoring setting, and you also get a built-in tachometer. Now, for those of you who are watching this video wondering about the whole dwell angle thing, at the time when I shot this, it was pretty late at night. Probably another reason why I shouldn't be uploading this, because at times it's so dark you can't hardly see anything, and for that I do apologize in advance. But at the time I also did not have any ready access to a points and condenser style ignition system against which the dwell angle meter could have been tested. And of course, I don't know the most about those sorts of things. I can adjust a points and condenser system to get it running well, but the technicalities of such are a little bit beyond me. So the only feature range on this thing that I ended up testing to any in-depth degree was that of the tachometer. And I can tell you that it does work, at least in the case of the meter that I got, but I have to wonder if people haven't found themselves having trouble with this, as Harbor Freight's normally excellent 90-day return policy does not fully apply to this product. Oh sure, you can return it, but if you should do so, they will actually charge you a restocking fee. And I wonder if this has to do with their having gotten far too many of these meters back, only to find that nothing was actually wrong with them. There are people I've spoken to over the years, and it's somewhat of a common piece of knowledge that people who work in the product returns area of any major company will sometimes say that as many as 90% of the products which have been returned to a company don't end up having any sort of a fault in them whatsoever, which is a pretty sad commentary when you think about it. This meter comes in very simple packaging. The only thing it is just a plastic overwrap and a paperboard sleeve over this case. And while the sleeve and the outer wrap were in pretty good condition, there's some dust in here that was present when I first opened up the box, and there's also some minor damage to the edge of this carrying case, which I would imagine is nothing more than cardboard covered in some kind of a vinyl substance or another. Amongst the things you get with this multimeter, the first and perhaps most important, if you're buying it for the same purpose that I had in mind, is this, the inductive engine pickup, part number 95670. That's the same part number as the rest of the meter has. There's also a Type K thermocouple, and while I don't have them handy right now, you also get a set of conventional test leads. It's hard to tell where they've wandered off to because stuff on this workbench is always wandering off to some place or another. But let's just go ahead really quickly and see what you can actually end up measuring. There's a frequency setting, temperature in Fahrenheit and Celsius, DC amps in several different scales, several different resistance scales, DC voltage from 200 millivolts all the way up to 1000 volts, though I would imagine it is a very poor decision to utilize this multimeter with any sort of exceptionally high voltage. There's AC volts in 200 and 750. There's a transistor test, which, as usual for these things, is probably of pretty dubious utility, but it does at least look like the transistor testing socket would be usable. I've never actually seen it work on any of those DT830 meters. There's the tachometer testing range, the dwell angle testing range, and once again we're around to the DC current measurement. Somewhat surprisingly, this multimeter doesn't offer an alternating current measurement range. If you have impaired vision, this might be a worthwhile multimeter for you, as it has very large and easy to read digits. Unfortunately, there is no backlight, and the true clarity of the display is not being really accurately represented right now because my Handycam is being a pill and initially refused to focus. But the display is quite readable, and while it has no backlight, you do at least get a data hold function. And on the back side of the holster, there's a place where you can put the test leads. You can hang it up, which might be very handy in an automotive situation. And there's also a rather flaky and rather hard to deploy if you don't have a meter lead handy. Don't you just love magnetized screwdrivers? I certainly do. Those are components from another thing that the company sent me for review that I haven't actually reviewed yet. So let's see if I can get this opened up without actually tearing it to pieces. A scissors, that's just the thing to use. There we go. Opens right up. Seems to be sturdy enough that the meter will stay put while you operate its various controls. And like I say, in my opinion at least, there is exactly one reason why you would even consider buying this multimeter, and that is solely the engine analyzer functionality if it meets your requirements. And I suspect that in some cases it might not. For example, if you have a vehicle that utilizes a so-called waste spark system that actually fires more than one spark plug at a time, you may find yourself having to do a few more mathematical gymnastics than are ordinarily called for in order to read this unit's display. And speaking of mathematical gymnastics, this actually does come with an instruction sheet that I would advise you strongly not to lose, because you cannot find it on Harbor Freight's website within the operating instructions. It is an addendum that goes into how you should read and what sort of mathematical operations are required to make use of the tachometer function depending upon how you've actually hooked it up. It's not tremendously difficult. Basically, it's either multiplication or division depending upon how you've made the various and sundry connections. But with all of that said about this multimeter, let's go ahead and get back into the thick of things with the savable, hopefully, portions of the original review. Well, as much as it might pain me to admit it, in the name of being completely honest, I think that the automotive meter is probably telling the truth when it reports a dead battery. Watch what happens to the terminal voltage when I turn the power on. Oh boy, does that ever fall off badly. But it just begs the question, how poor of a quality can this battery actually have? And this thing hasn't been sitting on the shelf too terribly long. I would assume that date code indicates the 13th week of the year 2017. There's just no excuse for that battery being as weak as it is. I'm trying to find out where the cutoff point for this thing's low battery warning actually is. We just hit 7 volts and the symbol came on, and it's still falling. Not as fast as it was, but it's definitely still falling. So that battery is toast. I'll go ahead and put a new one in it for the sake of making these tests, But the only thing I'm going to test on this multimeter is, in fact, the engine analyzer function. I don't have anything to hand right now with a points style ignition, so I won't be able to speak about that. But I will try the tachometer function. And I have done this previously. It did not work. But just to give this thing every possible benefit of the doubt, I will install a fresh battery. Before I do go ahead with my plan to replace the battery, however, I am kind of wondering if maybe there is a defect within this multimeter that is causing excessive current draw. So I've arranged a contraption here with the other multimeter to try and determine just how much current is actually being drawn from this. I noticed a brief spike when I connected the last of the jumper leads, indicating that there was some kind of a capacitor in here, probably charging up. I'll go ahead and turn the power on, and we'll just see what we've got. And it does seem a little bit on the high side to me, but certainly not excessive. 3.5 milliamps, a little bit high for my liking, but certainly well within tolerance. While I'm inside this meter and looking at all of the circuitry, I suppose I might as well offer some of my thoughts and views on the construction quality and its protection circuitry, assuming that there is any. The construction quality actually seems pretty good to me. This doesn't look like a circuit board that was simply hung from the wall and had solder thrown at it. There's an off-brand capacitor there. The main integrated circuit is, of course, a blob on board, but you can see the board was designed for use with a DIP or dual inline package. Conventionally packaged integrated circuit probably matches the layout perfectly of the ICL 7106 from Harris Intersil. There are a few random adjustments on the board, probably for calibration purposes. Fancier meters tend to handle this sort of thing with an attached EEPROM of some kind. Less approachable to the hobbyist who doesn't have the capabilities to read out one of those chips and modify its contents accordingly, but also probably a symbol of higher quality. Hiding under this very curious ribbon cable is the beeper that's utilized in the continuity test. It seems plenty acceptably loud to me. I don't know why they opted to run that ribbon cable down from the main board to a daughter board of sorts. Maybe there just wasn't room to put everything on the main board, but you'll notice that the rotary selector switch is actually a portion of the daughter board. There's the manufacturer's name. There's the model number of the product that it's based on. If you look in here, I really can't make out too many protective features like MOVs, positive thermal coefficient resistors, anything like that that would serve to protect the meter from someone doing something stupid with it. But one thing that you can see is the very edge of an AGC fuse holder. That looks like a real treat to replace, doesn't it? Just more poor engineering, poor design that went into this product. Another reason why I am definitely not going to recommend it. I can't really tell from here, even with the battery out, if that's actually a proper ceramic explosion-proof fuse, but I very much doubt that it is, and I suspect that any effort to repair it would probably result in little ball bearings, maybe even a spring or two, jumping out and landing everywhere so that you'd never see them again. There are, of course, more adjustments for calibration. We see one there, we see one there, and we also see one there. And of the three that are labeled, the only one that I recognize immediately is the Hertz measurement, or cycles per second. So now that I've installed a new battery in this, I guess we'll take it outside and we'll try it on some various ignition systems, and I'll give you some of my thoughts out there. The instructions that you get with this meter are quite basic. The main instruction manual doesn't even go into any detail about the engine tachometer, revolutions per minute measurement function, and it only talks ever so briefly about configuring the meter to detect dwell angle. With the all-sun version of this meter, it appears that you don't even get any instructions whatsoever about utilizing the engine analyzer functionality, but Harbor Freight did include, and seemingly wrote, as is common for most of their products, their own instruction sheet with regard to utilizing the signal pickup for the engine analyzer purposes. This discusses engine RPM measurements primarily, talks about how to hook it up, and how, depending upon where you place the pickup, that you may have to do some mathematical adjustments, some calculation of the results in order to arrive at a correct figure. One thing that they don't talk about are what sort of ignition systems this meter is designed to be utilized with. Obviously, the main target that they have in mind is a system using something like a coil and a distributor. I have no idea what happens if you try to use this with something like a waste spark ignition system, as is seen on General Motors 3800 series engines, coil-on-plug, probably a non-starter for a lot of people. I know that Ford tends to put their coils right down on top of the plugs. There's no plug wire linking them or anything. The 4.8 liter LS series V8 engine in my pickup truck also uses coil-on-plug technology, but General Motors actually did include short plug wires with each one of them. And of course then there's the question of the number of cylinders that you have in your engine. And it's here that I'm very, very surprised by their decisions in designing this. It only goes down to 3 cylinders, so if you have a single or 2-cylinder air-cooled engine, you'd have to do some calculations to get accurate results. Likewise, if you have an engine that's larger than 8 cylinders, and while I know there have certainly been some 12, 16, and perhaps even more cylinder gasoline engines created, the most relevant limitation here is probably directed at those who have a 10-cylinder engine. Ford and Chrysler both manufactured such in V configurations. And here again, you could probably utilize this meter, but you would have to do some mathematical calculations to compensate for the results, because they will probably be off. Speaking of ignition systems, I'm not going to try a whole slew of them tonight. The only ones that I'm going to try are the ones in the Chevrolet Caprice station wagon and also my 2007 Chevrolet Silverado pickup truck. And yes, the garage is a huge mess right now. I know it. I'm working on it. There's been a lot of stuff going on in here lately. Alright everyone, I'd like to take a moment just to apologize for the low lighting conditions here in the garage. I'd also like to caution headphone users that due to the wonders of the General Motors R4 air conditioning compressor, this car tends to produce a fairly shrill sound when it's operating. So just before I hit the key and turn it on, you probably want to adjust your volume control downwards. Now you can't say that I didn't warn you. And I also think that I'm right on the cusp of eating quite a bit of crow. I hate to admit this, but it hasn't killed me before and it seems unlikely to kill me now. I think a lot of my problems with this multimeter were a result of the faulty battery. I'll show you why in just a moment. I do find the instructions regarding the operation of the probe again a little bit odd, because they indicate that you should be within 10 centimeters or approximately 4 inches of a spark plug for the most accurate readings. And yet, as you'll soon see, unless of course this thing decides to change its behavior all of a sudden here on video and make me look like a moron and eat an even bigger helping of crow, it seems to be plausibly accurate now. So we'll go over here and we'll turn the key on inside the old car. Let the chime get out of the way here. And then we'll fire it up. And look at this. I think that might actually be a fairly plausible reading. If you multiply it by 10, that would give you a result of around 800 revolutions per minute. Let's just see what it does if I pick up the throttle on the car. So now it actually seems to be working. Go figure. Sometimes I really do worry about myself. But my apologies to the meter, to you and the viewing audience. for starting out with such a dour tone, convinced that this thing was going to be a piece of junk. I'm still not totally sure it isn't, because there is a saying about multimeters that have a transistor tester socket on them, and while I do not view it as universally true, that saying goes that the easiest way to find out whether or not a multimeter is worth having is whether or not it has a transistor testing socket on it, and if it does, it should probably be removed from your list of consideration. In other words, it's probably junk. But like I say, I apologize, but this is an honest review and it will be uploaded as it happened. Now, just when you thought this video couldn't get any worse, guess what? It did, or at least the lighting did. Out here with Naughty Truck, the 2007 Chevrolet Silverado. And while this camera does fairly well in low light, it doesn't have any night shot capability. And my beef with the lack of a backlight on this meter still most certainly stands. So you just have to take my word for it that I've actually gone and hooked it up to one of the coil-on-plug igniters. As I said, there are short plug wires here. So we'll crank this thing up. There we go. That'll shed some light on the situation. And let's see what we're getting here. Looks like we're getting a reading that fluctuates a little bit between 8 and 10. You multiply that by 10, of course. So then you're up to, between 80 and 100. And then you take that times 8, and that'd put you somewhere around, between, well, now it's gone down to 7 a few times. So between 700 to 1,000 RPM. We'll just verify my math here. Although this calculator is about as trustworthy as the figuring in my head usually is. Maybe it needs a battery too, although I'd swear it's had one recently. So we'll go with 7. We'll multiply that by 10. Come on. That is, of course, 70. We're doing real good so far. And then we'll take that times 8 for the number of cylinders, because we're actually on one plug wire here and we need to do that. And we end up with a figure, this thing says 560, but I am not entirely sure that middle segment at the end is lighting up. Yeah, that calculator needs to see a doctor, but if we go in here and look at the truck's own instrumentation, I think I could agree with that. I think I could say we were right at about 560 revolutions per minute. See if we rev it up a little bit, which is a little bit harder to do with this truck because it has an electronically controlled throttle. There's nothing I can grab by hand to rev it up. We'll just see if the numbers still stay plausible. I'll even try to get video of that if I can, but I don't know that these leads are really long enough to let that happen. Alright, so here I am sitting inside the truck now. We'll rev it up a little bit. I'd say there's a little more error in our results there. Okay, something very weird is happening. Alright, sooner or later I'll make up my mind about how I actually want to review this product, but I don't know if it just automatically shut off on me or what happened there. It's supposed to have an auto shut off. But yeah, I'd say its results are still entirely within tolerance if we do all the math to get the numbers right. So although I still don't think this is a particularly great multimeter, I mean, it's obviously a very inexpensive instrument, the part that I do care about actually does seem to work. As soon as I quit resting on my laurels and I actually paid attention to what it was trying to tell me, that its poor battery was bad, then it worked. So I'm changing my recommendation. If you don't mind the very real possibility that you might have to pay a restocking fee if this meter doesn't work for you, and again, I have no idea why Harbor Freight's doing that, unless of course they know that a lot of people are returning these or something. I just don't know what's going on with that. But I am changing my initial take on this to say that if you have a use case for this thing and you think it seems likely to work in your situation, then it's probably a perfectly fine piece of equipment, especially for the price, which as of this video's production date is right around $35 with all taxes, shipping, and gouging included. So Thank you as always for watching, putting up with the fact that I was wrong, but hey, at least I admitted it. Didn't try to lie or cover it up. And certainly do feel free to leave a constructive comment if you happen to have one. And as a brief postscript to draw this video to a close, I'll go ahead and do some tests on the other ranges of this Cen-Tech engine analyzer meter, just to see how accurate it actually is. Of course, I'm not going to be making a wide variety of tests here. I have a 47 ohm, 5% tolerance resistor sitting right there with a set of test leads clipped to it, and the little Mastech MS8209 is telling us that it is a 46.6 or 46.5, depending upon when you catch it, ohm resistor. Certainly well within tolerance. We'll do a cross comparison on another meter here. Just see what it says. 47 ohms on the button. Okay, 46.9, 46.8, it floats around. And let's see what the Harbor Freight Cen-Tech meter's interpretation of things happens to be. Certainly seems well within agreement. So let's do a voltage check. Take the test leads off of the resistor, and I'll get everything set up. I would certainly say that its DC voltage readings are in specification, though every now and again they do tend to float around a little bit. And then, of course, there it is in comparison to the Mastech meter. And here both meters are, giving their impression of the voltage present on my AC power line. And again, they are very close to one another. In this application, nobody's going to argue about 1/10 of a volt or two.